So you and we're about to go on a little adventure together. That adventure is going to span 118 years of Tudors, and it's going to be one generation at a time. How does that sound to you? I'll be your host this evening. My name is Christina. Thank you for joining us here at my Tudor era Tapestry. In the dim candlelit chamber of the Tower of London on February 11, 1503, Queen Eliza lay in her childbed, her strength ebbing like the Thames beyond the stone walls. Today was her 37th birthday. Her golden hair clung damply to her pale brow, her face exhausted with the strain of a 7th childbirth and the lingering grief for her eldest son Arthur, who had died only 10 months prior. The room was heavy with lavender and rosemary strewn to purify the air. Yet an oppressive stillness clung, broken only by her lady's soft murmurs and the distant tolling of the tower bells. Eliza, in a linen shift, clutched a small crucifix, having given birth on February 2 to Catherine, a frail daughter born prematurely, now in a cradle nearby, tended to by a wet nurse. The labor, grueling after 7 pregnancies, had left her weakened, her body faltering under sorrow and queenship demands. Her blue eyes, once uniting York and Lancaster, flickered with resignation, though her lips curved faintly for her attendants, ever the gracious queen. Among them Elizabeth Boleyn, now 22 and a devoted lady-in-waiting, her gentle hands adjusting Eliza's pillow, her face reflecting the weight of her own maternal joys, and the queen's fading light. King Henry was still back at Richmond Palace to avoid possible contagion. They didn't know what had caused the queen's fever. He sent letters of prayers and hope. Eliza's heart ached for him and their children, Margaret, betrothed to Scotland's king, Henry, the boisterous Prince of Wales, Mary, her golden-haired joy, and little Catherine, whose faint cries pierced her. She recalled Meg's proxy marriage the previous week, a triumph she had witnessed with pride, her strength already waning. Meg's small hand in hers, the ruby ring glimmering, warmed Eliza's heart, a reminder of the peace she had forged. Eliza's thoughts drifted to her mother, Elizabeth, whose fierce spirit she carried, and to Arthur, his gentle voice calling her now. Her ladies, including Elizabeth and Agnes, pressed cool cloths on her forehead, whispered prayers, and offered spiced wine. But the fever post-birth grew relentless. Elizabeth Howard, her eyes dim with worry, spoke softly of her children. Mary's bright laughter, a fleeting comfort in the somber chamber. Eliza murmured a prayer for her own children, her voice a whisper, asking the Virgin to guard them. The air grew heavier, candle wax weeping as if in mourning. Eliza's breathing slowed, her hands loosened around the crucifix. Her ladies knelt, rosaries clicking, as the priest's voice rose in solemn cadence. Elizabeth of York, the rose who bloomed in winter, slipped away, her heart stilled, leaving a court and a family to mourn a queen whose love had been their anchor. In that February of 1503, Eliza's death cast a shadow over the tower, her passing a quiet end to a life of grace and sacrifice. The bells tolled a dirge for a queen whose light had warmed England. Her newborn Catherine soon followed her into eternity, leaving Elizabeth Boleyn, Agnes Howard, in the bleak chill, a loss as profound as a mother's love. Six-year-old Princess Mary Tudor sat at a window seat at Etham's palace nursery, her small hands clutching a wooden doll, its painted smile a stark contrast to the tears streaking her cheeks. The air was heavy with the scent of lavender from sachets tucked into the cushions, but the warmth of the crackling hearth could not dispel the cold that had settled over the court since her mother, Queen Eliza, had died just days ago on her 37th birthday, after giving birth to a tiny daughter who died shortly after. The palace, a haven of Tudor green and gold, seemed dim, its tapestries of roses dulled by grief. Mary, her golden curls tumbling loose from a velvet cap, her blue kirtle smudged with ink from a childish attempt at a letter, bore the delicate beauty of her mother, but her wide eyes, usually bright with laughter, were clouded with a sorrow she could barely name. Her lady grandmother, Margaret, a figure of stern devotion, had taken charge, her black velvet gown sweeping through the corridors as she ensured the children's care. At 59, Margaret's face was a map of resilience, her eyes sharp with the weight of securing her son's dynasty. She found Mary in the nursery, curled in the window seat, and knelt beside her, her hands gentle despite their strength. The death of Arthur, followed by Elizabeth, had left the Tudor line fragile, resting on young Henry, now 11, and Prince of Wales. And the girls, Mary and Meg. Meg, 13, newly bound by proxy to King James IV of Scotland just weeks before, was Mary's closest companion. In the nursery, Meg sat with Mary, making the most of their time together. Mary giggled, a fleeting spark, though her eyes strayed to the empty chair where Elizabeth had once read to them. The nursery was a world of make-believe, where Mary and Meg played at knights and queens, their wooden swords clattering, as young Henry, boisterous and proud, led their games. Yet even he was quieter now, his bravado tempered by his mother's loss. In the tender green of a spring morning in 1503, Maggie stood in the herb garden, her hands cradling a sprig of rosemary, its sharp scent a quiet prayer for the dead. Maggie bore the fair beauty of her Plantagenet lineage, yet her heart was heavy with the weight of a court in mourning. The air was soft with the hum of bees and the rustle of new leaves, but the shadow of loss hung over her. News of Queen Eliza's death in February, alongside her daughter Catherine, followed the earlier blow of Prince Arthur's passing the previous April, cutting like a sharp blade. Maggie, born the daughter of the Duke of Clarence and cousin to Queen Eliza, had known the sting of fate since childhood. Her mother had died in childbirth. Her father had been executed by her uncle. Brother Edward had been executed by King Henry in 1499 to secure the throne. And it was a wound that had never healed, his boyish laughter a ghost in her dreams. Now Eliza was gone, her golden grace extinguished after childbirth, leaving the court adrift. Maggie had wept at the news, her tears falling as she knelt in the castle's chapel, its walls cold against her brow. Eliza's kindness had been a light in Maggie's life. Arthur, too, had been a dear, solemn boy of 15, whose gentle manners reminded Maggie of her own son, Henry, now 8, playing in the courtyard beyond. King Henry, her cousin's widower, was said to be broken, his sharp mind clouded by loss, his treasury strained by wars and alliances. Maggie's Yorkist heritage was a double-edged sword, restored to favor under Henry, yet her blood made her a figure of suspicion. In the muted light of March, 1503, Lady Margaret Beaufort, her 59-year-old frame wrapped in a black velvet gown, stood alone, the stark mourning attire a reflection of her grief. Her lined face, framed by a severe gabled hood, bore the weight of a lifetime's battles. Wars of the Roses, exile, and the fragile triumph of her son, King Henry VII, on Bosworth Field. Yet the death of Queen Eliza, her beloved daughter-in-law, after a grueling childbed, had cast a pall over Margaret's iron resolve, stirring fears for the Tudor dynasty she had fought so hard to forge. Eliza's death, followed swiftly by that of her newborn daughter Catherine, had shaken the court and Margaret's heart. She loved Eliza, the Yorkist princess whose marriage to Henry had sealed the union of warring houses. Now Margaret would do her best to secure the futures for Eliza's surviving 3 children, Meg, Harry, and Mary. Meg, now 13, was preparing to depart for Scotland. A queen, her absence another thread unraveling the family Margaret cherished. Her worries for the dynasty gnawed relentlessly. The Tudor line, once bolstered by Arthur, now rested on young Harry, the 11-year-old Prince of Wales, whose fiery spirit and love for jousting thrilled the court, but unsettled his cautious lady grandmother. Margaret saw in him her son's ambition, but feared his impulsiveness, so unlike the measured resolve of King Henry, now 46, and worn by years of vigilance. Arthur's death in April had been a blow. Eliza's loss left the king a widower, his grief cloaked in stoic rule, but evident to Margaret in his terse letters. She prayed for his health, knowing his enemies watched for weakness. Margaret, ever pragmatic, doubted peace could hold without strong heirs. Her grandson Harry was healthy, but one heir was not enough. Little Mary, 7, was a delight, but her future lay in betrothals, not thrones. Catherine, Arthur's widow, lingered in limbo, her Spanish alliance vital, but her dowry disputes were a problem. Margaret, who had orchestrated Meg's Scottish match, now pondered Catherine's fate, perhaps a marriage to young Harry, though the boy was years from readiness. Her mind churned with strategies, alliances, land grants, prayers for divine favor. At night, by the light of a single taper, Margaret penned letters to her son, urging vigilance, suggesting counselors, her script precise despite her aching hands. She prayed for him, for Meg in Scotland, for the Tudor rose to endure. The wind rattled the oratory's leaded panes, and Collie Weston's bells tolled softly, a reminder of mortality. In that spring of 1503, Margaret Beaufort was a grand matriarch, armored in faith and fear, her heart fixed on her son's crown, her soul pleading for a dynasty to outlast her prayers. In the golden haze of July, 1503, Meg stood in the gardens of Richmond Palace, her slight figure draped in a light gown of green damask. Her green eyes, sharp with a girl's curiosity, scanned the horizon as if seeking the rugged moors of Scotland, her future home. The weight of her new title, Queen of Scots, sealed by proxy marriage to King James, rested lightly in these summer days, a distant promise overshadowed by the raw grief of her mother's death in February. Richmond gardens, vibrant with marigolds and gillyflowers, were a sanctuary for Meg, a place to escape the somber hush that had settled over the Tudor court since Queen Eliza's passing. The loss of her mother after the birth of little Catherine, who followed her to the grave, had left a void in Meg's heart. She could still feel her mother's hand, warm and steady, guiding her through the proxy ceremony, and the memory brought an ache she hid behind a practiced smile. Now she prepared to depart for Scotland, to join James, her journey set for August. Meg felt the pull of duty and the pang of leaving her family, her father, King Henry, stern but loving, her brother Harry, now 12 and brash as the Prince of Wales, and little Mary, 7, whose laughter echoed through the palace like a bell. Meg wandered the gravel paths, her slippered feet crunching softly, a small prayer book tucked under her arm, a gift from her lady grandmother, Lady Margaret, whose watchful presence loomed large. The court buzzed with preparations for her departure, trunks packed with velvets and furs, letters exchanged with Scottish envoys, and whispers of the grand entourage that would escort her north. Meg's thoughts swirled with images of James, a king of 30, whom her tutors described as learned and gallant, with a court of music and chivalry. She wondered if he would like her, if she could be the queen her lady mother had believed in, her heart fluttering with both excitement and fear. In the shade of an oak, Meg paused, watching her sister Mary chase a butterfly, her giggles a fleeting joy. Nearby, her brother Henry practiced archery, his bows carrying on the breeze, a reminder of the boyish energy she would miss. Catherine, now a quiet figure in black, walked the gardens too, her presence a link to the brother Meg still mourned. Meg felt a kinship with Catherine, both bound by duty to foreign fates, and she offered a shy smile, which Catalina returned, her eyes kind, but shadowed. At night, in her chamber overlooking the river, Meg knelt before a small virgin statue, its candle casting soft light on the oak-paneled walls. She prayed for her mother's soul, for the strength of Scotland, for her family to hold fast without her. The Thames murmured below, and Richmond's bells chimed faintly, a lullaby for a girl on the edge of queenship. In the crisp autumn of 1503, as Blickling Hall's orchards glowed with russet apples, and the Norfolk fields shimmered under a harvest moon, 2-year-old Anne Boleyn toddled through the manor's modest halls, her eyes sparkling with precocious curiosity. Blickling, a fortified manor of warm stone and timber, was a world of its own. Its tapestries of hunting scenes and woven roses cast soft shadows where Anne's tiny feet pattered. Her mother, Elizabeth Boleyn, had returned to Blickling from her duties at King Henry's court, clad in her kirtle of deep green, guiding her daughter's unsteady steps with a tender hand. Her Howard lineage lending a quiet pride to nurturing this sharp-witted child. Elizabeth was pregnant again, scarier this time after the recent death to childbirth that had just taken her mistress, Queen Eliza. But Elizabeth Boleyn was younger than her mistress, 23 to Queen Eliza's 37. With a little prayer, she might just make it through this third birth. Thomas Boleyn, ever ambitious, was often absent, his role as a rising diplomat and courtier pulling him to Greenwich, where he served in the council chamber and aided diplomatic efforts following Prince Arthur's death the previous year. Anne, with her sleek dark hair and a laugh like a bell, was a whirlwind of energy, chasing her older sister Mary, now about 4, through Blickling's garden paths. The sisters, under the watchful eye of a nurse, scented with lavender, gathered acorns and wove daisy chains. Anne's small hands deft despite her age, her chatter laced with a boldness that made Elizabeth smile. In the nursery, warmed by a low fire, Anne clutched a wooden doll, its painted face a companion for tales of princesses and far-off lands, sparked by her mother's stories of courtly grandeur. Elizabeth, a devoted lady-in-waiting to late Queen Eliza, until her death, had served with grace at Greenwich. Now at Blickling, Elizabeth poured her courtly poise into her daughters, her presence a steady anchor. Thomas, when home, noted Anne's quickness, his mind turning to French tutors and courtly training to shape her for a future beyond Blickling's quiet walls, his diplomatic service fueling the Boleyns' rising ambitions. Elizabeth Boleyn, having lost her royal mistress, carried quiet grief, her prayers in Blickling's chapel heavy with the loss for the queen whose court she had graced. Anne, oblivious to these tides, found joy in childhood rituals, learning to trace her name with a wobbly quill or listening to her mother's soft songs in the chapel, where candlelight glowed on a modest altar and myrrh lingered. Elizabeth prayed for her daughter's futures, her voice steady despite the court's sorrow, her hopes for Anne and Mary woven with dreams of influence and grace. Back in early August 1503, Ferdinand, Isabella, and Henry VII jointly request a papal dispensation from the Pope Alexander VI to allow the marriage, as canon law, based on Leviticus 20:21, forbids a man from marrying his brother's widow due to the impediment of affinity. Catherine's testimony that her marriage to Arthur was unconsummated supported the request, as it meant no true affinity existed under church rules. Now in the tender bloom of spring 1504, 18-year-old Catherine, the widowed Princess of Wales, stood in the oratory of Durham House, her slender hands clasped over a rosary of coral and pearl, its beads clicking softly as she murmured prayers. The air was soft, scented with incense and beeswax from candles, flickering before a small virgin statue, their flames casting shadows on the stone walls. Catherine, clad in a black velvet gown, its hem heavy with mourning, bore the regal poise of her mother's training, her auburn hair pinned beneath her gabled hood, while Maria, in a simple dark gown, mirrored her solemnity, her young face etched with devotion. Catherine's eyes, once bright with a girl's hope, were clouded with grief, their lashes damp as she mourned her husband, Arthur, taken by fever 2 years past in April 1502, and Queen Elizabeth lost in February 1503 with her newborn daughter Catherine, a child named in hope, but gone. Durham House, a grand residence on London's Strand, was Catherine's refuge. Yet its tapestried chambers felt like a gilded cage, echoing with the uncertainty of her palace in a court unmoored by loss. The Tudor dynasty, so carefully woven by Henry and Elizabeth, trembled in the wake of those deaths. Arthur, the heir whose marriage to Catherine had sealed Spain's alliance, was gone, his gentle smile and halting Spanish a memory that pierced her heart. Maria's soft glances reflected shared sorrow. Elizabeth, whose warmth had welcomed Catherine to England's cold shores, had been a beacon. Her death in childbirth, a cruel echo of Spain's own losses, a grief Maria mourned too, having seen the queen's kindness to her mistress. Catherine knelt before the altar, Maria at her side, their prayers fervent for the souls of the departed. Her prayer book, its pages worn, open to St. Catherine, glowed with defiance, urging her to endure as her namesake had. Letters from her parents, King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella, arrived like a steady drumbeat, their words sharp with expectation. From Granada, they pressed for clarity on her future, urging her to secure her position, perhaps through a new betrothal to young Prince Henry, now 12, the new heir. Ferdinand's script, precise and calculating, spoke of Spain's need for England's alliance against France, warning her that her dowry, only half paid, was a point of contention. Isabella's letter, softer but no less firm, reminded her to uphold Spain's honor, to be a queen in spirit, if not yet in title. She longed to write of her loneliness, of the ache for Arthur's quiet laughter, but duty stilled her pen. Her reply is formal, promising obedience, Maria's gentle presence easing the solitude of the task. Durham House was a world apart from Richmond's bustle, its halls quiet save for the whispers of her Spanish household, whose youthful loyalty brought warmth in their Castilian murmurs. Catherine, invited to Mass with the royal children, Maria faithfully at her side, saw the family's sorrow mirror her own, their small hands clutching rosaries as they prayed for Elizabeth and Catherine. She longed to comfort them, to be their sister, but her widow's veil set her apart, a Spanish princess whose future hung in limbo. The uncertainty grew with each passing day. Rumors swirled of Henry VII's plans to remarry, perhaps to a foreign princess to bolster the treasury, strained by wars, and Arthur's lavish wedding. Catherine's dowry, unpaid in full, was a thorn in the negotiations, her father's letters hinting at a return to Spain if no match was secured. Yet the idea of leaving England, where she had vowed to be Arthur's queen, felt like a betrayal of his memory and her parents' trust, a sentiment Maria's steadfast gaze seemed to echo. Catherine walked Durham's gardens, their rose bushes budding in the spring warmth, their thorns a mirror of her fears, Maria trailing quietly, her small figure a constant reassurance. Once she glimpsed young Henry, the new heir, practicing archery, his fiery curls bouncing as he laughed, his boyish bravado a stark contrast to Arthur's quiet grace. Among his companions was Charles Brandon, 20, his brief marriage to Margaret Neville annulled, and his new betrothal to her niece, Anne Brown, was already whispered about, a reminder of the court's shifting alliances. Catherine wondered if Harry, too, would be her husband, a thought both daunting and strange. His youth a barrier her parents dismissed as temporary, Maria's curious glance meeting hers in silent question. Her future a question unanswered, Maria's loyal presence a quiet strength beside her. You can share your thoughts with me at longlivethequeenpodcast@gmail.com. Slide into my DMs on Facebook or Instagram at Long Live the Queen Podcast, or join the party on Patreon, where we have extended episodes and bonus content.